The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, historian and civil rights activist Mary Frances Berry on her new book, History Teaches Us to Resist, which details the history and role of progressive movements in America. Plus, Bill Press talks with Adam Kruggel of People's Action and Kischa Peña with Down Home, North Carolina, about the bold agenda progressive Democrats need to win in rural America. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Mary Frances Berry wasn't planning to write another book, but after the election of Donald Trump, the historian, activist, and former chair of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights knew that she had something important to say about what progressive movements could accomplish even in such challenging times. And we say hello to Mary Frances Berry, Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought and the Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the former chairwoman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and the author of an essential new book, History Teaches Us to Resist: How Progressive Movements Have Succeeded in Challenging Times. Mary Frances Berry, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Well, thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure to have you with us. The election of Donald Trump was a moment of despair for many Americans, and the idea of a silver lining seemed impossible. In your new book, you argue that, in fact, there may be one. Much of the book focuses on progressive resistance to presidents and their policies. It starts with Franklin D. Roosevelt's initial failure to prohibit racial discrimination in the defense industry. So what happened?
Well, basically, this book is not a list of how-tos to attack, Donald Trump. It's not that. What it is a book that reminds us that historically progressive movements have been able to organize on policy issues and to actually defeat presidents who were not willing, and administrations, people in the president's administration, who weren't willing to make the progressive change that was sought. And that it, in fact, happens with friendly presidents, as I call them, people who we would support, whether they're Democrats or people who are progressive Republicans, which some people might think is an oxymoron. But that if you stick to the policy issue and you have a protest movement that's well organized, as the March on Washington movement was as a prototype, you can get a president to do what you want to do in discrimination, in the jobs, in the defense industry, even though the president has decided that he's not going to do it. And in the case of the March on Washington movement, A. Philip Randolph, who was a central figure in it, the important thing about it was that he organized. It was palpable. You could see the organization if you looked around the country to see if people were ready to come to Washington. But they didn't actually have to come. Once the president understood that it was going to happen, he caved and went ahead and did what he should have done in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving to a conservative presidency, you also write about Ronald Reagan. This, of course, the president who attempted to fire you from your position on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and abolish the commission completely. You prevailed in that fight, and it's not the only victory you see coming out of the Reagan era, correct?
Yes, there were major victories in the Reagan era. Reagan, by the way, most people don't remember at all, and if they do remember him, they think he's the smiling president who has the building named after him and the airport in Washington, D.C., et cetera, and that's all they think about, the icon. But he was really had very, very right-wing policies during his administration, anti-civil rights, He started his campaign in Mississippi at the place where the three civil rights workers in '64 were murdered. And his policies were awful. He attacked everything from women's rights to affirmative action to giving drugs, AIDS drugs that had been developed to people who were suffering mightily from AIDS and wouldn't even utter the word until his good friend Rock Hudson who's another actor, died, and then he started talking about it. But anyway, the point with Reagan is that on a lot of the civil rights issues where we seem to be losing, the civil rights community organized well enough to, in fact, defeat him and get legislation passed in Congress to overturn some of what he did. And most importantly, the Free South Africa movement succeeded in getting sanctions passed in Congress against the apartheid in South Africa and making everybody in the United States aware of what apartheid was, which helped to lead to the overturn of apartheid and the freeing of Nelson Mandela in the prisons and the independence for South Africa. All of this over Reagan's objections. He vetoed the sanctions bill after we fought for a year to get it with protests and demonstrations, and then we got it passed again over his veto. So this is a clear example. The other example is Reagan and the Martin Luther King holiday, which he, of course, opposed as he had opposed the Civil Rights Acts. And he ended up, because of the power of the protests over time, being the guy who had to sign the bill when it was passed by Congress.
So in this day of Donald Trump, we have lots of hope. I mean, that's kind of the message here when you think about everything you're up against in that Reagan era, and to think of the things that actually were able to advance.
Yeah, there are two things to think about. There are a lot of things to think about, but two of them are that you can win on the issues if you organize, if you're persistent, if you work hard at it, like people did on the health care forums when they were trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act in the first year of Trump. If you do that on everything, you can prevail. Pick your issues, work on them, and you can. And you can do that whether it's Trump or whether it's whoever it is. You can be a friendly president like Obama on the pipeline, Dakota pipeline that the Native Americans, the indigenous people, were protesting against. They finally prevailed with him. Of course, Trump came back in and overturned the decision, and we haven't mobilized sufficiently to stop it. But there are ways to do this. And in the despair that I saw in everybody's voices and the crying after he was elected, Trump, it was clear to me that people needed the message that you can march, yes. You have to do more than march. You have to engage in civil disobedience, all kinds of tactics, and you have to be persistent. But if you prevailed in the past, you can prevail in the future, and you can go up against Trump. The second thing to remember is the courts. We leave the courts so often out of the equation. The Constitution gives us three ways to make change. One is voting and running for office. The other one is to get legislation passed. And the other is to go to court and to litigate and to use our First Amendment freedoms to petition and to organize. And people forget that even if you make major change and you get the courts captured by the right wing, which is what happened with Reagan after we got all those victories, that in fact the courts can overturn what you have put in place. So we have to work, when we think our politics, we have to work just very hard on making sure that the right people are in the Senate to confirm the federal judges and the right people are elected in the state courts so that we can keep the change that we make and sustain it, and so that we can make more change.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Mary Frances Berry, Geraldine R. Siegel, Professor of American Social Thought and Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania, author of the new book, History Teaches Us to Resist: How Progressive Movements Have Succeeded in Challenging Times. Professor, the book draws on your own deep experience as an activist, and you invite us to learn from those who came before us. First of all, in terms of strategies and tactics, what are some of the problems that social justice movements have encountered?
Well, one of the problems is that people often join in the movement once they hear about it or become so popular in the media and so on, who really aren't that interested in the issue. They're just seeking celebrity of some sort. And that's okay, I mean, if you can add people, but if they in fact don't keep to the message, and if they in fact distort the message, then in fact you can have a problem. The other is making sure that the media covers what you do. The reason why you have to engage in tactics like the Americans with Disabilities movement when it started getting ADA passed in Congress, when at the last minute when things looked dire, people in wheelchairs abandoned their wheelchairs and climbed and crawled up the steps of the Capitol to make clear what they were doing. Or people who years earlier than that, to get the regulations issued for the 504, which is another accommodations act for disabled people, and they couldn't get any regs, and you can't enforce the law if you don't have the regs, even though you get it passed. They came over and took over the building lobby at the department that was supposed to run that, and went to the house of the guy who was the cabinet secretary until he finally issued the regs. Sometimes you have to engage in tactics that will put pressure. You have to disrupt. And you also have to be persistent and make sure the media won't cover you if you don't do anything. For example, if you use social media all the time, Twitter's great, Facebook's great, all these things are great. But you also have to show up, because if you don't show up, then the media won't cover what you do. So you have to keep all these in mind. And coalitions, working with the coalitions that have been working on this issue for a long time. They may not have had the great success on the issue, but they've been at it a long time, and they have a lot of knowledge and information. And once you make a policy change, they're the ones who are going to stick around to, in fact, see to it that it's implemented.
We want you to sit back and listen to this AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We'll hear more from Mary Frances Berry in part 2 of her conversation. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Language matters. For example, the words that corporate and government officials use to report on the health of America's economy can either make clear to us commoners what's going on, or hide and even lie about the reality we face. Consider the most common measurement used by officials and the media to tell us whether our economy is zooming or sputtering: Wall Street's index of stock prices. The media literally spews out the Dow Jones average of stock prices every hour, as though everyone is waiting breathlessly for that update. But wait, nearly all stock is owned by the richest 10% of Americans. So the Dow Jones average says nothing about the economic condition of the 90% majority of Americans. For us, and for the true economic health of America as a whole, we need to know the Doug Jones average. How are Doug and Dolores doing? Well, as we've seen, stock prices keep rising to new highs, while wages and living standards of the middle class and poor majority have been held down by the same corporate and political leaders telling us to keep our eye on the Dow. To disguise this decline, they play another dirty language trick on us when they issue the monthly unemployment report. Currently, with the unemployment rate down to 4%, they tell us America's job market is booming. But wait again. That only reflects the number of jobs, not the dollar value of those jobs in terms of wages and benefits. Having lots of people doing poorly paid work is hardly a healthy job market. Notice that they don't measure the stock market by the number of stocks out there, but by their value. And they should measure our job market the same way in order to give an honest picture of how Doug and Dolores are doing. This is Jim Hightower saying, of course, they'd only do that if they gave a damn about all of us Dougs and Doloreses. And that speaks volumes about their bias for stock-owning elites.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, part 2 of our conversation with Mary Frances Berry, author of History Teaches Us to Resist, and why she believes it's important to remember one woman's fight against sexual assault over 70 years ago. There is a very specific story you recently spoke about that fits in to the Me Too movement. It is the story about Recy Taylor. Who is she, and why is it important to remember her?
Well, Recy Taylor was a black woman who, in 1944, she was raped by 6 white men, and she, in fact, was willing to actually come out publicly and talk about what had happened to her. We talk about the Me Too, hashtag Me Too movement, and people coming out publicly talking about it. She did it in the South in 1944. And Rosa Parks, who many people think of as just somebody who sat down on the bus, was an organizer at that time, and she was the person the NAACP sent to go work with Recy Taylor on her case. There was a trial. Of course, the guys were not convicted. This was the South at that time. I may not just say that because that happens today when people are not convicted, when these dire crimes take place. But she had the courage to do it. And also, she was just an ordinary working-class woman. Whereas today, a lot of the talk about what happens with sexual harassment and sometimes rape and so on is about celebrities. We have to remember the people who are at the bottom, the people who wait tables and clean hotels and have all kinds of jobs where they're the most vulnerable, and many of them have families that they are sometimes the only support or a major piece of support, and they can just not, brush off whatever happens to them and walk away from the job. So she's an example of somebody of great courage. And that this has been going on. And black women, even before Recy Taylor, all the way back to slavery, were raped, most often by white men, sometimes those who owned them. And there are lots of stories of how they came out and took great risks to actually tell people what had happened to them. So her story is very important at this hour.
The strength for somebody to be able to come out and address something like that, especially at that time, is remarkable to me, and it's just phenomenal. And more people need to know about Recy Taylor and the other folks like her.
Absolutely.
We are in a remarkable moment, to say the least, with the presidency of Donald Trump, with a flourishing of activism. How do you place this moment within the historical context of your book?
Well, this moment is, for me, just another example of someone coming in office who is pernicious and who unexpectedly takes office. Take Bush v. Gore in the 2000 election. I held hearings on that when I was chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in Florida, and had Jeb Bush and all these other people who were officials there come in and testify, and people who were victimized, who in fact were told they were felons and that they couldn't vote when they went to the polling place. And as one guy put it, he'd never been in a courthouse except one day he went there to be a witness for something. And George Bush, in my opinion, stole the election in 2000. And shortly after that, at first there was criticism, but once 9/11 happened, all that passed and we forget that. He is just, Donald Trump is just another in the long line of unexpected presidents who have all kinds of flaws and that we have to deal with, and whose policies, I'm more concerned about his policies than I am about his personality. And what we have to remember is that you should go after policies. It's not just faces in high places. It's going after policies. And that even when we should go out and vote and elect people, yes, try to elect people now, try to take the Congress back and so on. But we not only must do that, we must organize, protest, hold people accountable, and make sure that we get the policies that will help people and not just people, who are in office, who are time serving. So in this Trump moment, it's clear that organizing, sticking to it, being strategic about what one does, remembering that social media is important to organize, but also the government can keep you under surveillance. And disinformation can be more easily spread. That's always happened in movements, but now it's very easy to spread, as we've seen with all the things that have happened. Disinformation about your movement. You have to be in your decision making and what you're going to do and so on. Don't telegraph things. There are all kinds of lessons to learn which can be seen in these various movements. And it's not just about a charismatic leader. It's about leaders. A. Philip Randolph is a good model for all of us, but it's also about the people who are, in fact, the organizers. I mean, Black Lives Matter has 3 people who are its leaders. The media has hard time getting in touch with the fact that it's not just one person. But it's all the people who are in organizing and who are doing these things. Also the messaging. Your message has to be simple. Gun control, for example. What these youth are doing is remarkable and it's great, but it has to proliferate in movements all around, and it has to be persistent so that it doesn't die out before the battle is won. That's one of the lessons.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we let you go, in one of his most well-known quotes, Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Let us realize the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." In this push and pull account of politics and protest, can we believe in those words?
There are 2 things. One, those words are always attributed to Martin, but he was quoting Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian minister in the 19th century, who is actually the guy who said that. And Martin would always point out in his speeches, he would say, as Theodore Parker said, and he would say it. So I like to give people credit where they do. But in any word,
fair enough.
Case, the words themselves are important because what it does, makes you realize that, in fact, social change takes time, and you may get setbacks as time goes on. But the movement, the progress is forward, and you sometimes will go back, but you don't go all the way back. And so the moral arc of the universe is long, and eventually it does tend toward justice, but people have to do something to help it along. In other words, as Jimmy Baldwin used to say in his book, which he quotes from the Bible, the title, The Fire Next Time, that each generation has to make its own dent in the wall of injustice. And everybody in each generation, somebody has to go through the fire to make social change. And so the people who are organizing now who want positive, progressive change are the ones who have to do it at this hour. But they have to believe, and this book tells you, that if you do the right things and if you work on these issues and if you're smart about it, you can make change no matter how challenging the times.
Mary Frances Berry, Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought, Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania, and author of the new book, History Teaches Us to Resist, How Progressive Movements Have Succeeded in Challenging Times. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Thank you for having me.
You are quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Adam Kruggel of People's Action and Kischa Peña with Down Home, North Carolina.
Let's get to the issue of this half hour here, which is, I mentioned I interviewed Governor Terry McAuliffe last night here at the Hill Center. And one of the things he and I talked about, and he agreed, we've never seen in, certainly maybe not since the anti-Vietnam War movement, so much energy, so much passion, so much enthusiasm at the grassroots level as there is this year. And it's all on the progressive side, and it's making a huge difference. Even in Arizona last night, where the Democrat did not win the congressional seat, but in a district that Donald Trump carried by 21 points and Mitt Romney carried by 25 points, Democrats were able to get up and narrow that margin to just about 5 points yesterday in that very deep red seat. And here are two organizations with us today who are very much leaders in this grassroots effort on the progressive side. Adam Kruggel is with the People's Action, right? You're titled Director of Strategic Initiatives.
Yeah.
Whatever that means, you can tell us all about it.
Well, I'd applied for the Director of Unstrategic Initiatives, but apparently, that's all been filed. Yeah, all those jobs have been filled.
I could have gotten that one.
Bill was already in that position, so.
And Kischa Peña is from North Carolina with Down Home, North Carolina.
Yes.
I love it. Love that title. Where in North Carolina?
I am in Mebane, North Carolina, Alamance County.
Where is that?
Mebane, Mebane.
Never heard of it.
Yeah.
I don't know Mebane.
Most people call it Mebane.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Mebane.
Mebane.
And
yes.
and you have two chapters, you said, North Carolina?
Yes, we have Alamance County chapter and the Haywood chapter, which is located in the mountains of North Carolina.
I'm from South Carolina, so we could have a whole conversation about North Carolina versus South Carolina barbecue, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's a totally
different conversation.
I don't know.
Vinegar-based?
I'm a mustard-based guy.
Oh, yeah, no.
I know.
All I know is
those are fighting words.
All I know is 12 Bones.
There you go, in Asheville.
I have no idea even what that is.
Asheville.
Okay.
Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay.
When President Obama went to Asheville, he went right to 12 Bones.
12 Bones,
from the plains, yeah. And Peter and I went to 12 Bones, and we went down to Asheville too. Right. Okay. And People's Action is.
Yeah.
So what's the focus? What do you?
Well, People's Action, we're a people's organization. We're one of the largest sort of a community organizing networks in the country. We have about 1 million members in 34 states, 600 organizers around the country,
Whoa.
and we're building power for everyday people so that we can have enough power to really govern and have control over our lives and begin to build a world where we really put people and planet first. So we're fighting for racial, economic, environmental, and gender justice all across the country.
Now you're in town today because there's this a summit, Rural Progressive Strategy Summit.
Yes.
So the focus is what? To focus on these rural areas? I mean,
yeah.
Because people say, well, the progressives all live in the big cities, right, on the two coasts.
Exactly.
And I guess you're saying no.
No. I mean, you look at the history of this country, right? Like it's been I mean, obviously, every major, powerful advancement in our country's history, certainly in the last 100 years, it's been built around powerful urban-rural coalitions. You look at the New Deal, you look at the Great Society, you look at the civil rights movement. There's always been, even if we go further into, you look at the history of the populist movements and the birth of the labor movement, it's always been folks, working people, like coming together from cities and farms, and you look at the farmer labor movement and across the Midwest. That's always been a part of our history, and that's something that, as a progressive movement, we've been neglecting and abandoning, and we've paid dearly for it.
But Kischa, isn't the problem that these people living in the rural areas are all Trumpers?
I don't think that's a problem. I think.
Is it a reality?
It is. It's a reality.
A lot of them are.
A lot of them are, but I think people. We were talking about this earlier. I think people needed another option, and Trump, gave them an option that they felt like they had been missing out on, and he was speaking to people who were looking for something different, and that's not a bad thing.
Okay, so Hillary did not give them that option. Was not speaking. That was not her message, right?
Right.
Is the Democratic Party today have a message to people who are living in, not in the big cities, in rural areas?
I don't feel like they had a message for me. And I grew up in a rural town. I live in a rural area. Mebbane's rural. I think that we tend to forget about small towns. We feel like, and like I said, we were talking about this before. I feel like the Democratic Party automatically assumes that they have a certain group of people's votes, and we are very much moving away from that. And people are concerned about specific things. And if you're not addressing those specific things like healthcare, education, things that people in rural towns are, struggling with, then you're going to lose them. And just speaking to, your own agenda is not going to work anymore. We have to have these conversations with people that are living in rural towns and small areas, because they do show up and vote. And right now, I feel like people are not buying just showing up and voting for, one specific party just because, Democrat, Republican, I'm just rural town.
Right.
Yeah. So they're looking for another option.
Adam, so what kind of a response are you getting?
Oh, it's been amazing. I think, can I just your question is important. Two quick things.
Yeah.
One, what the Democratic Party and progressives in general, we do not have infrastructure in rural communities, and so we are losing the battle for people's hearts and minds, and we're not building trust. We're not showing up for people, and that's the number one thing we need to do. And the second thing is,
when you say that, what do you mean by that? You mean
we're not knocking on people's doors. We're not building organization. We're not getting them involved in everyday democracy. But the right wing forces are everyday organizing, and they're organizing in a much more effective, strategic ways, and they're dominating in these rural communities, and they're not hearing our vision or message, and they don't trust people on the progressive side because they don't see you. We're not showing up for them where they live. We're not showing up for them on their issues. And I want to say one thing, just to your question, this is real important to remember. Rural people, first of all, rural America is not white. It's not synonymous with all white people. It's incredibly diverse, right? Native Americans, people don't understand that. It's very diverse.
Don't know that.
Yeah, it's very diverse. Largest, it's always been diverse, right? It's like indigenous folks, it's black folks, but so we have this image, right? But you know what the Democratic Party doesn't have? They don't have a message for poor people and working people, and that's what rural America is. Rural America is working people who live off the land, and that is where we are failing. So it's like, it is definitely, we need infrastructure in rural communities, but we need an agenda that speaks to all people that are struggling, that are being crushed by this economy, an economic system, and a system of like racial hierarchy that's killing us. And so that's what we're trying to say is we need a bold agenda, and we need to build power with people where.
No, it makes total sense to me. No.
Oh, and you were saying, how's it going? It is going. It's been amazing. I'm going to tell two quick stories.
Okay.
One is I want to talk about Down Home, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're hearing across the country. So Down Home, new organization, birthed out of the sort of tragedy of 2016, but folks are really doing like this. Have this awakening that we will never get free if we're not building power in Alamance County and Haywood County and all the places that have been abandoned. And so just in 8 months, they've built multiple chapters. They are taking the fight to big corporations and corporate power. They passed for the first time in a county, in Haywood County. This is real. Haywood County, Trump won by almost 35 points in this county, right? They passed, within 3 months, they passed the first ever living wage policy for in Haywood County for public workers in Waynesville in the history of rural North Carolina. They did that in 3 months because people are so hungry and they're organizing. And when they and I just want to maybe turn it over to Kischa. Like when you were out knocking on doors, they knocked on 4,000 doors. They documented over 1,400 conversations. What was the refrain you heard most often on the doors? You all named the report after that.
Oh, no one's ever asked me before. Is the name of our report, because one of our members in Haywood, I guess when they knocked on her door and we had a survey of issues, that matter to you most, and Sam is her name, and she said that, no one's ever asked me any of these things before. And it's like, this is who you're pandering to, but you're not listening to people. And that's what I learned. Like, people are ready to talk. People are looking for someone to listen. And when you open your ears and you open your heart, you're gonna get to the core of what people need. And then you have to take action with that. You can't just listen and, it's good for a report. Now we have this information, and now we have to deliver on what the people need, like education, healthcare, guaranteed healthcare for all. People are really scared of losing their healthcare, losing their Medicaid, and like we those are things that I feel like in America we should not be afraid of losing. Access to good food, access to clean water. That is ridiculous to me that we are even having to have these conversations and ask for these things.
Well, one thing as an organizer, to me that I think it strikes me about this in the areas where you're active, like this county you mentioned, you knocked on 4,000 doors, and you had 1,400. What was it?
Conversations.
Conversations, right? I mean, and you were able to affect change. That's relatively a small universe, right? I mean, this is doable. I guess is the point I'm saying. Whereas you go to a Chicago area, or even Washington D.C. or San Francisco, L.A. or whatever places where I've been active in politics, and you're talking about trying to reach hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people and mobilizing all of this on a smaller scale. You can really kind of get things done. It's still hard work, and it's still determined work. It's got to be organized, but it's doable, right? Yeah. And particularly North Carolina, I think, is such an exciting state. So we were over years on the air in Asheville, North Carolina. So that's kind of part of the state we know. But like Reverend William Barber, who's done the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina, we know that Barack Obama carried North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina is on the verge of being a really progressive state, right?
I'm learning that we are very important, and
absolutely, and the potential there, I think, is right on the cusp. Of moving forward. So, I think the work you're doing in North Carolina is so extremely important.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
And what Down Home is doing, and what groups that we're working with as part of this movement all over the country doing, is they're going to the places in North Carolina, but we're doing this in Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all over the country. In North Carolina, they're going to the places where no one else is going, and because that's the missing piece, right? Like a lot of the major cities, we're organizing, people are with us, we're making an impact, but it's these rural areas, and you're never going to build enough power in North Carolina if we don't have both right? We need both the urban and rural.
These are areas that the Democrats have largely historically ignored. No, I mean not always historically, because obviously you mentioned FDR,
the long history, FDR.
and LBJ and others, but
last 30,
the more
40
modern
years,
Democratic Party has just kind of ignored those guys and written them off. I know I was Democratic chair of California at one time, and a lot of people just said, don't even worry about the Central Valley, or just Don't even campaign there. Don't even have candidates there, which is insane.
And how did we turn California from red to blue? It was when we began, when we had to be able to close the margins, because I organized in California for 15 years, and I was organizing in San Francisco, and I was tired of talking to the same people. You had an organization on every block, and we had nobody in Fresno, nobody in the poorest places. San Joaquin Valley, it's the most prosperous agricultural region in the history of the planet. And if it were a state, it'd be the poorest state in the union. And you take that's like the rest of the country. And that's the only way we turned California from red to blue, was by investing in those kind of places so we could at least contend. We may not win every election, but we at least have to contend for people's hearts and minds. And when we do that and we fight for people in all the places, all the people in all the places, we can win.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. I want to get back to your I want to get back to your second example you mentioned. But first, I just want to interrupt too. People, we don't have that much time together, so people who want to know more, people who want to get involved around the country, whether they're watching us on television or listening on the radio or following us online, how can they reach you? How can they find out more? So now's the time for a plug for your website.
Plug it.
Right.
Okay.
So if you want to learn more about Down Home, downhomenc.org is our website, and we have a Facebook page, Down Home North Carolina. We have the Alamance chapter is Down Home NC Alamance chapter, and Down Home NC Haywood chapter.
Okay, but downhomenc.org people can
yes,
go.
Yes, and that is where you can find our report from our conversations. This is from the collective.
We got you a copy.
But our 30-page report from all of our conversations and the statistics, the data is on our website at downhomenc.org.
Downhomenc.org.
Yes.
You know, what we need is a down-home everystate.org, like down home Delaware.org, down home New Jersey, every state.
Well, so that's what we're building. So peoplesaction.org, peoplesaction.org, and so Down Home is a member of a national movement a national organization called peoplesaction.org. We have chapters in 34 states. We have powerful organizing in 34 states, and we're growing. We're trying to get to all 50, and then we're going global. But if people go to our website, you can also just look online and see a map of all the different organizations and how to get involved.
And how you can plug in.
Yep, exactly. Right. Powerful. Okay. Every day of the week in each of those states, there's something. People are organizing, meeting, working together, and so it's a great source of information. And you can also find the Down Home report and our report on our website as well.
So this is all part of the revolution, part of the resistance. Right. It's really happening. It's very, very exciting. I mean,
it's happening.
It's happening.
It really is. Downhomenc.org or peoplesaction.org. So you're going to mention a second example, if you recall, when I asked you what kind of response you're getting around the country. One was North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina is very clear.
Been telling us about another area.
Yeah, so we learned from North Carolina, and then we took their sort of the parts of how they were building and documenting these conversations, because we really want to learn, right, of what's happening. So we did it in over 10 states. We're going to be doing 10,000 conversations, and we've identified 72 counties where we're building. It's like you were saying this earlier. It's like we need to focus and get it so we can get to scale. We don't need. We can do this. It's doable. 72. So real quick, pivot counties. Super important for us to understand. Trump won 207 pivot counties that had voted for Obama and flipped, right, to Trump. Because and what we're doing is we're building in 72 counties where people are suffering across 10 states, and we're building power in these counties. Of the 72 counties, Trump won 64, and he won most of them, 52 of them he won by over 10 points, right? But we've been out, so we've been building with this group of people. We've been just listening, starting just by listening and building relationships. And when we listen, what we heard is that people, what they care most about, 82% of the people we talk to, they want free universal health care. And this is in the counties that went for Trump. Universal health care, free higher education. They want clean energy. They want jobs. They want to be able to protect the land and the water and the air. And so.
So would those people have voted for Bernie Sanders?
So, I would say, I don't want to. There is a significant portion of those people in those counties. The people that we talk to, they will vote and support a bold progressive agenda. and the data shows that Sanders performed very well in those places. But an agenda like that, but also we also saw, Bill, that people in those communities, they are very, very, very eager to have a conversation about race in our country. And I think that's something we're seeing, is that we need to have a bold agenda, and we need to have a race-conscious agenda, and we need to be building. There's the opportunity to build powerful multiracial coalitions in rural communities, and also in between urban and rural communities in states across the union.
You know, I don't know it well enough that I could spout off the numbers, but I remember seeing that map of counties.
Yeah,
now,
the pivots.
It's true.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. She won the popular vote. But when you look at the counties,
it's stark. Yeah,
the number of counties compared that Donald Trump won compared to what Hillary Clinton won.
This is a map in our report. It's a map of where we've gone from 1996 to 2016 in terms of counties that are not competitive. So you look at this red map. This is all the counties where Republicans are winning by more than 20 points.
Right.
We cannot build governing power in our country or our state if we are not contending in all the places.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, right. So you're identifying these, these counties that were neglected, basically by the Democratic Party in 2016.
Yeah.
Just about a minute left. But are you identifying? So in those counties, are you also identifying like congressional districts?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got 34 that we're working in right now.
34 congressional districts in those counties.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. 34. Right. Democrats need 23.
Talk to me. Yep.
To take back the House of Representatives.
We are radically expanding the map of what we contend for power, but we gotta, like you said, we gotta talk to people, and we've got to listen. So
the two of you could deliver a control of the House of Representatives.
No pressure, man.
In 2018.
You know what, though? Real talk. But this is not, I want to be clear, Bill, for your listeners. This is not about a blue wave. Yeah. This is about a radical, we need to, a bold agenda where we're putting people and planet first. And we're giving power to the people. And the Democratic Party needs to have a real, we work closely with Keith Ellison, Pramila Jayapal, folks like that. They need to follow that kind of leadership. That's the way forward.
You got it. All right. Thanks so much for what you're doing. Thanks for coming in. Kischa Peña, downhomenc.org. Adam Kruggel, peoplesaction.org. Great work, guys. Keep it up.
Thank you.
This is the Bill Press Show.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible, Mary Frances Berry and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.